Thank you, Ruby. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the June OASPA webinar. My name is Dan Morgan. I'm the Director of Communications and Community Relations at PLOS. So I need to start with a few OASPA messages. We thank our 2022 webinar series sponsors who support and enable us to make these webinars available to everybody. Just some demographic information. We have had approximately 380 people registered for this webinar. We usually see about 50% of those attend live, but we will update you on how many of you there are today. You're all from all over the world and from, in fact, 48 countries. North America and UK make up just about half of that total, and the rest of you are spread out over 46 other countries. You're from around 290 different organizations. Majority of you are from an academic library, with many others joining from publishing organizations, academic research backgrounds, non-profits and charities, and other government and non-governmental organizations. So officially, this webinar is the second in a series of webinars focused on the experience of the researcher, and we're committed to continuing this series over the next few months. The webinar will focus on the ways in which researchers and scholars are normalizing open research practices by grassroots community building. We'll be hearing from 3 speakers from different regions of the world who will relate what has worked in their specific communities, quick wins and slow wins, and what they recommend for other members of the community, whether other researchers or publishers or librarians. We will then discuss the points we've all raised and then take questions from you all via the Zoom Q&A function. Please note that with focusing on the conversation and the Q&A tool, I myself won't be in the chat function much, but others at OASPA will be, and they'll be sharing links and useful bits of information there. We'll get to as many of the questions as we can, but panelists will also submit answers to any unanswered questions after that, and those will also be shared on the site and any of the resources shared during the webinar. I'd like to introduce the 3 panelists. Their full bios are on the webinar pages, but I'll give quick abbreviated versions here. Anita Eerland is an assistant professor at the Department of Communication Science at the Radboud University in the Netherlands. She's an open science advocate for over a decade and was involved in the founding of SciArchive, the preprint platform for psychology, involved in the Society for the Improvement of Psychological Science, where she was the vice president in 2019. And while she was at Utrecht University, she founded the Open Science Community Utrecht, along with Luc Brinkman. She's now involved in the Open Science Community Nijmegen and working on establishing the international network of open science and scholarly communities. From Kenya, Caleb Kibet is a bioinformatics researcher, a lecturer, and an open science advocate and a mentor. He is currently a postdoc at the International Center of Insect Physiology and Ecology, teaches bioinformatics at Pwani University, and was formerly a Mozilla Open Science Fellow in 2019 and 2020, where he developed a research data management framework for resource-constrained countries. Caleb is a founder of Open Science Kenya, an initiative that promotes open approaches to bioinformatics research in Kenya. He's passionate about open science and reproducible bioinformatics research, and he's always looking for opportunities to spread the word about open science, especially in his community in Kenya. Thirdly, we have Etienne Roesch, an applied statistician at the University of Reading in the UK, in the School of Psychology and Clinical Language Sciences, and he's also the Deputy Director of the Centre for Integrative Neuroscience and Neurodynamics. He's on the steering group of the UKRN, which is the UK Reproducibility Network, and he's the Community Manager for the UKRN Local Network Leads, who feature in about 70 institutions in the UK currently. He's also the founder and chief editor for ReScience X, an open access, peer-reviewed, free-to-read, free-to-publish academic journal for the dissemination of replicated experimental research. So, hopefully the topic, normalizing open research practices via these grassroots community building activities, is pretty self-explanatory. But I just want to take a quick moment to frame this webinar as a companion to a previous webinar that focused on UNESCO's recommendation on open science. It is clear currently that many funders, the UNESCO, institutions and other organizations are addressing open science and other topics via policy, guidelines and recommendations. And so we often discuss or solely frame open science or open research practices and behaviors by researchers or publishers as responses to top-down directions or recommendations. So we thought it was really important to also shine a light on these kinds of grassroots activities by researchers in their communities, much of which is the spark for a lot of the work and recommendations which do end up appearing in organizational and other policies. So this is more than enough from me. I'll come back in to moderate the discussion after the panelists have all spoken, but I would now like to turn this over to our first panelist, Anita Eerland. Over to you, Anita.
Thanks so much, Dan. Thanks for the invitation to be part of this exciting webinar. I will try to, let's see, share my screen with you all. Does it look okay? Yeah, okay. So when we talk about normalizing open research practices, which I will be calling open science because that's the term that I'm used to, we talk about establishing a culture change in science. And I like this, this graph a lot because it shows that we need a critical mass in order to adopt a new practice or to make a new practice become the norm. Now, what we see in open science is that for over a decade, researchers that were intrinsically motivated to conduct open science were involved in open science practices. But the transition to open science has been a little slow. So how do we reach out to people beyond the open science bubble? How do we reach out to the early majority and the late majority to establish a real culture change? Now, one way to get more people involved might be by having open science policies in place. And that can be on a local, a national, or an international level. And that's what you see happening. So universities come up with open science policies, but also funding agencies, for example. But simply having policies in place will not automatically make people adopt open science practices. It can be a way to get the laggards on board, but behavior change is more successful if people want the change themselves. Now, for some people, this already is the case. So when I give talks like this, that's the group of people that we call the experts. So those are the people that are intrinsically motivated to adopt open science practices. And they form the so-called open science bubble. But then there's a large group of people that are not practicing open science yet, but they are interested in open science practices. Now, in order for them to adopt open science practices, they need to know, first of all, what open science is, but also how you can adopt these practices and why they should do it. So what's in it for them? What's the benefit of adopting open science practices? And then there's also a group of people that are more or less ignored when it comes to open science. They either don't care or they are actively against open science. And those researchers will probably only adopt open science practices when they really have to. So that's when having policies in place can actually help. But what I like to stress today is that it's no longer a matter of whether we are going to transition to more open science, because the transition has already begun. And therefore, it is important to make this transition as easy as possible for all researchers involved. We should actually help each other, share knowledge, share experiences, and get together to discuss open science and to inventorize the need for support. And with that idea in mind, Luc Brinkman and I founded the Open Science community in Utrecht in 2018. And we had a couple of goals in mind for our own community. We wanted to make open science within our university more visible and accessible. We didn't know each other, but yeah, coincidentally, we met, we talked about open science, and we didn't know beforehand that we were both active in the field of open science and that we both had knowledge and experience to share. So we really wanted to have a community to promote peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. We also very much wanted to inspire and enable researchers to take the first or the next small step into the world of open science. We wanted to create a place where we can identify obstacles and the need for support so that we could also inform policymakers. So that are the goals of the open science or scholarship community. So what we need is the experts within our community, because those are people with a lot of knowledge and experience. But the target audience for our community are those people that are interested in open science but do not practice it yet. And I think that having these two groups active in your community can really help, especially when people new to open science learn about these practices from a colleague that has just a little more experience than they have themselves. So not having only experts telling people how they should do it and why they should do it, but having a colleague next door that can help you out is really what we wanted with this community. So that when you start with a new practice, you can reach out really close by. And we really wanted to make the gap between those who are learning and those who have the knowledge and that can share it to be as small as possible. Now, we started out in Utrecht, and within the Netherlands, there are currently 12 other open science communities. They also form a network, but we openly shared a blueprint of our community and later on also a step-by-step tutorial, or I think we called it a starter kit right now, that is publicly available. And after that, open science or scholarship communities also started spreading across the border. So we now have 6 additional communities outside of the Netherlands, and we are currently in the phase of establishing the international network of open science and scholarship communities, so that the communities can also learn from each other. And this is my final slide where I wanted to share some additional information. So links to the website of the international network, links to the starter kit, as well as a publication that we recently wrote with all the coordinators of open science and scholarship communities about how open science and scholarships can actually help the transition towards more open science. And I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Anita. No, really interesting, great follow on from my comments about, you know, how policy can be influenced by this kind of grassroots activity. Thank you so much. Great, so we'll move on to Caleb Kibet now, please, Caleb.
Hello, I believe that you can see my slides. So my name is Caleb Kibet. I'm from Nairobi, Kenya. And I'll be speaking about making open science practical. And this is the reality for most of us, getting to see there's a paywall and access to that research article is not possible, especially from resource-constrained settings where most of the research or even academic institutions do not subscribe to most of the scholarly open, more or less, subscriptions. And the other aspect that's from the researcher perspective as well is the aspect of research data as well. So, of course, it's really important for data to be properly managed and properly organized. But there's a cost implication that comes with that. And that cost implication is not something that's accessible for someone who has limited resources. But really, I've been reflecting and thinking about this number of things. What does open science mean for us as African research or academic institutions? And the other aspect is, how can we ease the adoption of open science or open practices within our institutions? How can we make that process of adopting these practices easy? How can we make it valuable? And of course, with regards to advocacy and policy. How can we control the narrative and develop policies and practices that work for our setting? And with this regard, I think it fits into the aspect of there's a bottom-up and the top-down approach. The top-down approach can easily miss that aspect of being able to understand the reality within those communities that actually hinder them from making or taking advantage of these open practices. So the reality of the matter, and for me actually, was that I cannot be an efficient researcher until myself and my collaborators are aware and equipped with open science tools and open science practices, and the concept of leaving no one behind. Being the only one who knows and can practice open science and can take advantage of this valuable approach is not going to move science forward. And therefore, for me, it's always been building a community. I've always been interested in building that awareness, creating the critical mass. I think Anita as well mentioned that. So I have a number of communities that I'm involved in, and Open Science KE was the first initiative that I got involved in. And we came together as a group of scientists, researchers, and students. And the focus there was to promote open science practices and more focused on bioinformatics. And here we aim to promote open, collaborative, and reproducible bioinformatics research in Kenya. And that was our starting point. And much later on, got involved with this other community, which was established by my students. And the focus of their community is to bridge the gap between established bioinformaticians and the mentors. And of course, to enhance collaboration, promote data sharing, skills, and code sharing as well. And if you look at all these communities, they are, for example, this one is student-led, established. So you could, if you're talking about the bottom-up approach here, it starts actually from the students. Then they can be able to influence their supervisors, influence their institutions from that perspective. And ultimately, I'm also involved in the African-wide community of H3 Bionet. And within that, I lead the Open Science Project. And I aiming to build open learning circles and communities all over Africa that are focused on community learning from the peers and teaching each other different skills. And one of that critical skill is the aspects of reproducible bioinformatics and genomic research and the practice of open science as a whole. And the model that we've found to be quite useful is the model, the Open Science Key model, which starts from sensitization towards building a community. And this follows on from the conversation that you cannot start training someone on something they're not aware of. You cannot get people to practice something they're not aware of. Are they aware of the benefits? So the sensitization aspect is really critical. Starting with sensitization, make them aware of the need and the benefits and the value of practicing open science. Then equip them, empower them, provide the tool, provide the skills that they need to be able to practice open science. And then move forward towards now having empowered them, get them to practice those skills via hackathons. It could be various collaborative projects, but make sure those skills that are gained from the workshops or training activities are actually practiced. And then all these lead into a community. And that's always been the series of events we've always held, starts from sensitization all the way to building communities as that. And during one of the projects actually was getting to realize that, especially when you're dealing with students and researchers from resource constrained settings, you realize that when it comes to publishing open access, they want to practice open access, but then the cost of publishing open access is prohibitive. So what are some of the options and alternatives available to them? Which institutions provide waivers and subsidies? But of course, the conversation ultimately leads to how can we still ensure that open access is not a barrier, especially to those from resource constrained settings. And so recently we had a series of events, the Bioinformatics Open Science Skills events, and which the final one was a BOSS conference. And the focus was to empower researchers with skills and tools in bioinformatics and open science. And what I want to talk about here is that it's really important to start from the grassroots. There's so much power in doing so. And I usually use the analogy of I'm a trail mapper and I'm a hiker. And I use the aspect that the summit, practicing open science and taking advantage of getting the benefits, that's the summit. But to get to the summit, someone has to map that trail. And that trail mapping is done by those who've gone before, the experts. They are getting to all the hands of the those who are upcoming, those who are interested in practicing open science, all their hands, and guide them towards the summit. The focus of allyship, be an ally and be able to support those in smaller communities who are also interested in developing. And this is what has been a great focus of mine. So let's continue this conversation, and I'm looking forward to further engagement on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. Yeah, I like the illustration of the guide map to a summit, you know, and you can map kind of the activities of grassroots people leading the trail, and you can map policies to that imagery as well. It's a good one. Moving on now to Etienne. I think you also have slides to share.
And I'm on mute. Hi there. So my name is Etienne Roesch. I am an applied statistician at the University of Reading. I'm currently in the School of Psychology, and I'm here to represent the UK Reproducibility Network. I would like to start with a bit of a disclaimer. So UKRN does not receive any funding from apart from competitive public grants, and I personally sit on the steering group. I'm involved in many on a few initiatives and a few projects. Among these is a research project in the UK to organize a national program, but that is all I have to declare today. This is my the main statement or message from my presentations, which is that I believe that grassroots community, as just like Anita and Caleb have explained, are actually a big force that is often underused in managing the systemic pressure of the academic system, I think. And I think there is a lot of energy that we can harvest from the goodwill of researchers who went into research because they wanted to do good and help people. So I think that it's an untapped potential. So how do I lead that conclusion? This is where sort of everything started, at least from my own perspective as a psychologist. There were many different studies showing that the general body of studies that is found in the literature does not necessarily replicate very well, and we try to explore the reasons why that would be the case. I like this graph because it actually shows that 90% of reseachers think that there is a reproducibility crisis, or as I like to rebrand that graph, is that 90% of researchers who answers surveys from Nature News about reproducibility crisis think that there is a reproducibility crisis issue. But when you dig a little bit into that, and on the right hand side you have different graphs about how these problems occur in different disciplines, and when you ask questions, you go to the school next door and you ask how they tackle this, you do realize that not every discipline has the same problems, and they don't necessarily tackle things in the same way. This led me to realize that actually there is not so much as a crisis. It's not that something has happened right now that really needs to be dealt with is just the consequences of a sloppy way of doing work due to wrong incentives or wrong success metrics, or the impact factors, for example, or what is needed in order to get promotion into the academic systems, and generally a wrong focus about novelty and instead of robust research results. And this cloud I produced when I first got into this field, and I tried to represent how my brain was feeling at the time. And it's really a mesh of different concepts and many different things that I myself didn't grasp necessarily as I should have, and so my personal goal and many people I work with has been to try to clarify this and to help others on the way to the summit. I really like this this image by Caleb, and actually reproducibility is not anything different than just doing good work. As a scientist, we got into science not because we were in for the money, but because we wanted to do good work. We were interested in helping others as much as possible. And so by engaging onto this career track, we decided to commit ourselves to doing good research. And so, in my view, reproducibility is nothing more than producing robust research that can be communicated and effectively and trusted. And so that means making sure that the methods are robust and reproducible, as well as having different results that are replicable. But that's and everything in between. And every methodology, every field will have its own set of questions and issues to work with. And so in the UK, a bunch of us created the UK Replaceability Network, which is a grassroots movement of academics who just volunteered their time to help each other in this realm. It has grown quite quickly, actually. Now we have 25 institutional leads, which means that 25 UK universities have committed money and time to push this forward, and so they formally appointed these institutional leads. We currently have 66 local network leads, which means so these are often unfunded roles that one individual in the university will take on to manage the community, create the community, and make sure that that local network participates and is aware of what is going on in the rest of the UK. We have an advisory board, of course, and we also have various levels of stakeholders, which I can speak about that later if you want. But these are publishers, as well as funders who are interested in this reproducibility thing and open research. And so altogether, we put together training, we provide training material to whoever is interested, we support local initiatives and tools and platforms, alternative ways to publish research output, so data and scripts and things like that. We have a shared calendar. We have different badges and different things to recognize the efforts that are being put together. And we, more importantly, we engage with national and international stakeholders. And so that has meant that after we were founded in 2019, we were asked to provide evidence to the Select Committee on Science and Technology for the House of Lords in the House of Parliaments in the UK to give our opinion about about the state of research generally in the UK, to point the finger at the issues that come up and try to see how these can be made better through law and so on. And so more recently we started engaging at the national level, thanks to a very big grant, to organize a national program so that all of this is a bit more sustainable. Since we started, there has been a number of other research networks, reproducibility networks that have been started, and so this is really something that we're really happy with and really proud of. And so this is, again, my conclusion. I think that grassroots communities is a very big energy. It's I'm sure that you know that, but the academics actually, they want to help. They have, they will actually spend the time and the effort doing things, even if they're not paid to do that. And so this is an untapped potential. And that's it from me. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Etienne. Yeah, let's get to discussion of this. Are we all visible on screen rather than spotlit now? I'll just pause until we can all be in a panel. So I've got a number of questions that I'd love to pose to all of you. I'm interested in, well, some of what you were saying, Etienne, about robustness and rigor. And I am interested in asking the question, is open science and open research, in fact, the most useful umbrella term at this stage in this journey towards the summit? You know, if a lot of the behaviors, in fact, relate to the rigor and trust in science, albeit openly and transparently performed, do you think people are still reacting to the word open and still presume it as some kind of radical open for openness' sake, when basically I'm fairly certain that most would agree that science done according to its own norms would be a good thing? So I'll definitely, yeah, Etienne, were you starting to talk?
Yeah, sure. So this, in my experience, the words that we use to describe this state of affairs can be confusing, and it also depends on who you're talking to. I remember a discussion that we had, I think, with Anita a few weeks ago, where we were discussing whether it should be open science or open research. And in my, I sort of resolved that conflict in my head by just using the words that people use and define the terms that I think are the most appropriate. And so I then prefer to speak about the output. And I think the openness is one dimension that is really important, because it holds us accountable to other people, and it makes sure that that others can replicate and so on. But I don't think it's just that, and so it's just one of the dimensions. So,
Anita, Caleb, any follow-on comments?
Well, no, really, I just wanted to mention that we within our growing network, we had a lot of discussion on the terms used. As you may have seen, there's a lot of open science communities, but within Galway, there's the open scholarship communities rather than science. I think terminology is important, and we opted to go with open science because that is a term that most people know. So yeah, we wanted to make use of that, but I agree that it might be useful to have a discussion on what would be the best terms to use.
Yeah, you're right. I think the terminology is just words. It depends on the value and the meaning that community attaches to those particular words. And that's why I'm always keen to get to understand what does it mean for you, for your community, and being able to define, of course, the priorities, because the meaning would define what you would do, the priorities. So for some, open science is to ensure everything quickly as data is generated, it's made public. Yes, it's open, it's within open science. But then for a researcher who may not have the resources to derive value from that data as quickly as possible, they would lose out. So they'll have to be able to figure out ways around that. And so in the end, how can we make open science beneficial to the researcher? And then from there, we can build it on.
Yeah. No, and I like how you're all putting that, really, that it's about the values of it. You know, whilst we're encouraging behaviors, you know, it's better if you do the behaviors based on agreeing with the value rather than just checking the box of, well, I did this, that, and the other, right? Thank you for the questions coming in via Q&A. We will definitely be turning to those. Just had a couple more. Just, do you think the fact that you are organizing such grassroots activities, would you characterize it as you're kind of, obviously you're personally and passionately involved in, you know, open science and rigor and reproducibility matters, but are you kind of characterizing your grassroots activity because you're following like a trend or following kind of an interest like displayed to you from the top down? Or is it because you're not seeing what you want to see prioritized enough, let's say in university administration or funder policy? Like, how would you characterize that inspiration? Is it because you see what you want to see or you don't see what you want to see? I can pick. Anita, do you want to go? I saw you unmute.
Yeah, I love that question. The thing I saw was that on the policy level, universities and funding agencies came up with open science policies without actually talking to researchers about what they can do and what support they need to adhere to these policies. So I really wanted to give the researchers a voice and also make sure that they understand that they can inform policymakers. So it's because I saw a discrepancy between the policies that are in place, and I saw a lack of knowledge. Well, that's, yeah, actually, yeah, I saw a lack of knowledge within the people that make those policies. So I got the feeling that they follow a trend without actually knowing what the work entails. So that's why I think having a grassroots community that can provide input is vital for these policies.
How about you, Caleb? Yeah.
For me, it was the need. The need. First, yeah, for most, I think it's quite different when you compare the global south and the global north, in that for most academic institutions, if I look at most of the universities in Kenya, and, except for South Africa, most of the universities, most of the open science or open access policies do not exist. But coming to the need, especially when it comes to reproducibility and data sharing and all those aspects, as I said, to be an efficient scientist, collaborate with other researchers and take advantage of all these practices, then there was need to empower my colleagues, empower my students, and empower my institutions to be able to practice open science. So it's always been starting from that awareness, greater critical mass, as Anita mentioned, I think, and we've also started now seeing policies coming up institutionally. So it's for most of us, the policies are starting from the researchers and the students themselves leading that.
Great. Thank you. Etienne, you used the word sloppy incentives in your slide, so I thought you might have something to say about this.
Yeah. I think in the UK, UKRN and all these different initiatives have started because as a way of raising a red flag, I think. So you may or may not know that researchers are constantly evaluated, universities are constantly evaluated, there's league tables, funding is allocated on the basis of these league tables, that are all becoming incentives, and so the value of research has shifted from doing good research to just meeting the targets, and it became quite clear that there was a relationship between the wrong incentives and the lack of robust results in research. And I think this is why a group of us decided that this was not the job that we got into for, and it was not quite representing the values of what we wanted to do. So yeah, that's.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to turn to some of the questions that have come in. Thank you again for these, and please do put them in the Q&A function. I'm going to prioritize the questions that are A, really fit the profile of the attendees, and B, that are answerable in a context. You know, if there's an answer that needs to be like an essay series, that I might kind of leave that to afterwards. But the question in from, which I'll slightly adapt. The question is, do you think that publishers have a role to play in educating researchers about open research practices and the benefits of open research? But I also add, well, and if they are, how well do you think they are doing? Is it the right way? See thoughts?
I think not all publishers are the same. Not all publishers care about the same things. But I definitely think that all of them have an impact on the way that we do things as researchers. And I think Anita and Caleb would agree with me that publishers also have a responsibility to make sure that we are able to produce a robust and sustainable research output. So paywalls, for example, is a big no-no in terms of how the research output can be progressed and contemplated, explored, dissected, and so on. And so there are many different practices that publishers put in place for some reasons, but these practices will have consequences, I think. So.
Any more comments?
I find it an interesting but also hard to answer question. But I think I completely agree with Etienne. I also think that that publishers maybe do not have an active role in educating researchers, but they can promote they can promote certain ways of publishing, and they can make sure that, or they can display what kind of research they find or what they find important in research. So for example, by adopting registered reports, by allowing null findings to be published, by allowing replication studies to be published. I think things like that can be signaled by researchers as showing that a publisher values those aspects of research.
Right.
Yeah, I think their role is more of creating an enabling environment to some level, and more specifically, not being a barrier to those open practices to begin with, but also in ensuring that there's an environment that would enable those who want to practice. And I think researchers and science in itself as a way of moving people towards a direction where science and research needs. And as long as they can facilitate those practices, then I think researchers can be able to get to that point. So just for them to create an environment would be something that would facilitate that.
Right. Yes, I've heard others say a publisher's role is to facilitate and not control, which is easy to say, but then you do often see the other part of that happening. Okay, I've seen a lot of questions. I'm trying to kind of group questions together. I've seen a couple of people ask about strategies that are effective in engaging with researchers who aren't already interested in or aware. So, you know, the interested or even the kind of ignorant kind of category that you were talking about, Anita. And I've seen some people talk about, and I'll link that to the question about a lot of this activity is linked to the science, technology, and medical field. And what are some of the ways to engage with humanities and social sciences researchers? Do you adapt your sensitization or messaging or activities? And if so, what do you find resonates? Anita, since I know you're kind of, you were from a kind of humanities kind of background, or at least in a school of humanities. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so what I think is very important within this grassroots community is to organize events or meetings or discussions that are tailored to the researchers that you want to reach out to. And within the humanities, I think what is most important is to stress that there are some aspects of open science practices that they are already practicing. They just don't envision it as open science. They don't call it that, but for example, public engagement is seen as an aspect of open science. And that is something that researchers within the humanities naturally do, or at least a part of them. I think it's important to highlight that. It's not a complete new way of doing science. And it's also, it applies also to them. I think that's very important. And then also change the word science into scholarship. That also helps. But I found it the most difficult audience to reach out to. So what we did, especially to reach out to people that are not really interested into open science or do not know what they should do with open science or whether they should engage at all, is to go to other events that are not about open science and then just talk to them about open science. That actually really helps, because if you organize an event and you call it something with open science or open scholarship, then only those that are already invested will show up, and not the people that you actually want to reach out to. I don't know, you had a couple of questions then. I don't know if I answered them all, probably not, but.
No, that was great. But yeah, let's move to see if Caleb or Etienne had any. I mean, the question was the dual one about real practical suggestions to reach out to the non-interested, and if there's anything specific for fields that you don't or haven't been as associated with reproducibility, open science, etc.
I'll go. So I still always go back to the why. Why are they disinterested? Understanding the context. What is the barrier to the adoption of these practices? And having an understanding of the reason. And I think especially at the very beginning, I was just doing blanket. Open science is good. We need to practice open science. It's the best thing for science. But in the end, I realized that especially when you come to a place where people work in silos, then the focus is more of what is the benefit to you, which would in the end translate to the benefit to science and the whole community as a whole. So for example, reproducibility as an example, so making sure that your work is properly, data management is done well, and research is reproducible is of the benefit to scientists, since that if they need to repeat that work, it's much faster and quicker. So if you bring it from that perspective, do it for yourself, for your future self, then they would easily buy into that, as opposed to or the purpose of sharing of the research. So that is the perspective. So it's not for sharing of research, but for your future self to begin with. And then ultimately, when they get to the point of sharing, it's all ready for sharing in a reproducible manner. So getting to realize the need, why, and then finding a way to address that.
Anything to add, Etienne?
No, I really like Caleb's strategy of first understanding what are the challenges and obstacles and asking questions. So I think as a very quick answer to your question, I would say, well, just be very curious and walk to the next door building and just attend their events and ask questions. That's a good first step.
Yeah, I've always said that we're essentially following after the first wave of people right up to the summit. And I think some of the people heading to the summit, say 20, 15 years ago, were very very expressive, very passionate. And I think there are some people who still associate some of this with a kind of, as I was saying in my initial remarks, a kind of radical notion. And I think even Peter Suber said in his book, one of the problems was that open access itself was seen as a much more radical notion than it was ever intended to be. And I hope, well, I see that happening with open science a little bit. And, you know, talking about nomenclature as we were earlier, that, you know, when this is actually about just science done according to its own norms, hopefully that kind of return to first principles of science rather than radical notions of openness is helpful. I see a couple of questions in here. I'm talking about, you know, well-resourced scientific systems and resource-constrained scientific systems. Now, I know, Caleb, you specifically addressed this, but this is for all the panelists. I'll combine the questions. How to solve the problem, which means that it is easier to argue for open science in resource plenty environments, and then how do we address that well-resourced labs can reuse data and publish ahead of time, but making data early on will disproportionately impact less funded and less well-equipped academics. Really, any thoughts on this topic?
I think it's a very important issue that you raised, or that was raised in the Q&A, and I really do not know how to answer that. The only thing is that I hope that by making changes or establishing a movement, we can facilitate changes at other places as well. But yeah, you have to start somewhere. So I hope that by having grassroots initiatives, at least in a couple of places around the world, that we can set for a wave of changes also on policy levels, for example, or on policy levels on the international level.
I agree. I think that change, we also need to realize that change takes time. The current situation is a result of what has happened for the last 60 to 100 years. The system is going to take time to adjust. I'm very hopeful. I think that there is reason to rejoice. I think we just keep at it.
And not having blanket expectations, similar expectations from different contexts. If you have the same expectation from someone from a very tiny lab in that actually survives from very limited funding, to someone from a well-resourced lab, they have compute resources, they have data storage in the cloud, they have all the resources required to practice all these best reproducibility and collaborative practices, then you would make it a barrier to the other scientists. And all this in the aspect of incentive, having the same level and so forth. So it's really important. I think there is this book by Leslie Chan and colleagues on contextualizing openness and situating open science. It's really important for us to contextualize open science and get to understand what it means for that community and what's best for that community and where do they start. What do they focus on first? What are their priorities? And if they can focus on their priorities, they can be able to walk their way towards all these other aspects of open science and openness.
Thank you. Now, I know we have a lot of, as we heard in the profile this morning, a lot of university librarians on this call. So I would love to ask, well, the question I had was, do you see alignment and/or collaboration between your grassroots research activities and activities coordinated by institutional libraries? And I know that one of the questions we received was also, is there any way that stakeholders such as institutional libraries and publishers, such as institutional libraries, can support these grassroots research-led communities? So So basically, yes, what's your alignment and experience with the library in this context?
I think I just answered that question in
yes.
the chat, but we actually do collaborate a lot with people from the university library. They seem to have a lot of knowledge on open science, on all the tools that are out there. They also organize a lot of events, but somehow that's what we heard from them. They find it difficult to find the researchers that make use of the tools that they have, or so somehow researchers don't seem to find the people in the library to work together. So we really try to involve librarians within our community. So often we organize events together, and we think that open science communities can also facilitate the knowledge exchange between librarians and researchers. So to bring those two groups of people together.
Yeah. Any other experiences with institutional libraries?
So not just libraries, although libraries is definitely one of the functions or departments or groups within the universities in the UK that we engage the most with, probably. But I think in our head, research is not done by just researchers. It's really a collective endeavor, and librarians, as much as admin support when we submit grants, for example, or IT services that handle access to computing resources and so on, are all part of this. And so I think I really like, I don't remember who said that, Anita or Caleb said, leave no one behind. And I think it is true. Everybody's in it. And it would be a mistake to say, well, these guys, they're not part of that. It doesn't make sense. I think we're all in it together, and librarians have played a really big role in this, in my experience.
Yeah, I second the sentiments that have been made. I think each group contributes to the whole. So let's just get them involved, and they've been really quite useful in doing so.
Cool. Just taking a question about new policies, new kind of activities that are going to, come into the space of behaviors and activities that we can display. Do you expect or envision that the grassroots community approach can be successful to motivate new open science promoting regulation and policies? Or would you say that's the reach of a grassroots approach? And the questioner says, because some active members in an open science community are likely to also be faculty or university council or other management or administration positions.
I think that's an easy question for us in the UK, given that we've just contributed to the House of Parliament, and which is actually a big deal for us in the UK. So the work that we've done has led to questions being asked, and you can watch the Marcus answering the questions from the ministers. None of the respondents really tamed their voice. They were pretty critical about the state of the system and how this goes. And so I want to be hopeful that this will lead to change. How that happens, when, I don't know, but at least we got our voice heard. And so hopefully we'll do more of this in the future.
Any other reactions?
Well, within the Netherlands, I noticed that the Dutch network of open science communities gets invited a lot by policymakers to because they want to hear from researchers. So, for example, the National Dutch Funding Agency (NWO) really wants to talk to us, and they really want feedback on their policies. They are trying to change their policies, and they really want input from us. So I do think that the grassroots initiatives can actually lead to new policies as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's actually happening, because that's where you demonstrate the need, especially when the practice starts without the policies. And sometimes for practice to happen, it could be awareness, just the need. But then sometimes for those who may take time to adopt, pushing and creating that critical mass and pushing towards the policy stage has also worked quite well, and the Grassroots actually are supporting that.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask, which I'll already frame is going to be the last question. So let's bring it home with these responses. It's a two-part question. I heard Etienne say the word hopeful. So my first part of my question is, I'd love to just hear succinctly how hopeful you are for the future, of open science, normalizing these activities that increase rigor and robustness of science and research. But also, and this can be as general or specific as you want, if there's one thing that you could change tomorrow, and that could be, as I said, a grand thing, or, you wish preprint servers did X or something like that. If you could have a change, in the next few days, what would that be? Who wants to go first? Hopefulness, and what one change, either general or very specific, your choice.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful when it comes to the impact on the future of openness, and because we've seen it has a cascading effect. The more we do it, the better we get, the more impact we have, and the more we get to do. And so getting to see the various communities, and started a few years ago, just maybe a few people, and in 2 or 3 years you can see all of Africa now. It's becoming a conversation, it's becoming a practice, and seeing various institutions, seeing the various groups, really like maybe the well-established professors and researchers who used to work in the silos now adopting best practices in openness and data sharing and reproducibility, and getting to look for researchers and students who can actually support them in doing that. I can see that the future is actually bright. The change is actually happening because of that critical mass that we are seeing. And so for me, it's just if there's one thing that can be done is the change is, let's not leave anyone behind. As we do all this, let's keep in mind that we can lend a supporting hand to those who are in need, and just work together, collaborate. Because all these grassroots communities, they are all over the place, yes. But why don't we work together towards we're pushing the same agenda? So coming together and just pushing that same agenda, and we can be able to achieve the impact that we are looking for.
Thank you, Caleb. Anita?
Yeah, I'm also very hopeful. That said, I don't think it's going to be an easy ride, because I think we're now starting a phase in which we actually have to have also tough conversations. So yeah, I think it's an interesting time. I think it will be difficult at times, but I also feel hopeful that in the end we'll get there, and that open science practices will become the new norm. And what I would like to see change tomorrow is the incentive structure, because I feel that probably is the main driver of the mess that we're currently in. And I think if we change the incentive structure, that will change a lot of aspects that we advocate for.
Yeah, I agree. So everything they said. I'm also hopeful. I think I want to be hopeful. Generally, I think it's useless to be pessimistic about things, but I do want to be realistic that things can take a long time to change. And if there was one thing that I would want to change tomorrow is our relationship with money generally. I think this is a big part of the incentives that Anita and Caleb have been talking about, and I think this is really not helping. So and I'm sure Caleb and Anita are the same. We got into research because we were interested about our world. We were curious, and we wanted to share this enthusiasm for the world, not to produce stuff that would end up behind a paywall, or to chase promotions or target numbers for somebody else's to make money. So yes, that's one thing we change.
Cool. Well, that basically just leaves me to say thank you so much, Etienne, Anita, Caleb. Thank you to OASPA and the people at the Events Hub behind the scenes for organizing this. I'm aware that everything that has been shared, all the useful resources, will be wrapped up, sent out to registrants, attendees. But if you want to take a moment to copy down anything that you saw shared but didn't quite copy paste yet, please do so. Anything that kind of seems like it remained unanswered, we'll try and address in a kind of follow-up blog post that kind of wraps up the event. But yeah, thank you so much. And if there's anything last minute, please throw it in there, and we can either tackle it now or in follow-up. But again, thank you to the sponsors, and thank you everybody.